Hi, my name is Megan Kelly Brower, and I am the rector here at Trinity Church, and I am just so grateful and glad to welcome you here tonight for this panel discussion. As we were planning this event, we considered several different locations and then decided that every location that had air conditioning was the right location for this event. So we're glad to have you here in our beautiful historic church. This congregation was founded in 1698, and this building was built in 1726. So the building itself is 300 years old this year, and we keep joking that America is a wee child, only 250 years old this year. But we're so happy to have this event as one of our celebratory events celebrating our tricentennial year this year. I just want to say a couple of practical things before we begin. First, we do have a free will offering box just at the end of the aisle here. If you care to contribute and help us offset the costs affiliated with this event and some of the others that we are hosting this year, we would be most grateful. And at the conclusion of this panel discussion, I hope that you will come to the building across the street where we have the Alan Bernstein Trio, some jazz music there, and some light snacks and drinks. And I believe that Gina will be offering some tours down into Queen Anne Square if you would like to take part in that as well following this discussion. If you need a bathroom, they are in that same building just across the driveway. I think one of the things that we say about Trinity Church is that it is a beacon in Newport for everyone coming into the harbor. You can see this church from such a distance and from the sea. And I truly believe that we wouldn't be able to make that claim were it not for the efforts that have gone into the preservation of Queen Anne Square. This beautiful space in front of this church allows it to be seen in a way that you can certainly tell from old photos would not be quite the same if these efforts had not taken place. So we are grateful for all of these efforts, and I am eager to hear more about it in tonight's discussion. And that is all from me. Take it away, Gina.
Thank you, Megan. Can everyone hear me okay? A little bit. Louder? Okay. All right. Well, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. My name is Gina Tangora. I'm the Director of Engagement for the Newport Restoration Foundation. For those of you who may not be familiar with our organization, we were established in 1968 by philanthropist Doris Duke to preserve and restore the architectural and cultural heritage of Newport. So today we take care of over 80 historic sites, many that were witnesses to the American Revolution. 70 of these are homes that are lived in by tenants in a unique tenant stewardship program, and we also have 2 public-facing sites, Rough Point, which was Doris Duke's Newport home, and now is a museum, and the Vernon House, which is a 300-plus-year-old house located just a few blocks away in the heart of Newport. So following Doris Duke's vision, NRF moved, acquired, and restored buildings on an unprecedented scale in the years leading up to the bicentennial in 1976. So one of those important projects, the reason why we're all gathered here today, really helped shape the fabric of Newport and the way we enjoy the city today, was the Queen Anne Square project. So when we first started talking about a program that would help celebrate the 50th anniversary of the dedication of Queen Anne Square, I should point out that we are exactly 50 years to this day when the square was dedicated in July 10th, 1976. We thought it would be important to really take a look at the impact of historic preservation on our community here and beyond, since this project is such a great example of the way that historic preservation and collaborative historic preservation process has shaped the city. So before we get started on the discussion, I wanted to share a little bit of background information on Queen Anne Square. The project that would eventually become Queen Anne Square had been in discussion much earlier in the 20th century, but in the midst of major redevelopment work in the city, alongside the preservation efforts of organizations like the Newport Restoration Foundation, the project of creating communal green space began to take shape between 1971 and then 1978. I did bring a few visual aids with me today, so Queen Anne Square. There's a photograph showing the Queen Anne Square in progress. It's out in the lobby now, but I think it's going to move over to where we're having the reception, so we can take a closer look at that later. But that's showing 32 Church Street, which is a cotton house in 1978. That was part of the strategic planning of Queen Anne Square. The other is I have a piece of a model that's actually Trinity Church. I'm going to try to show it. Let's see. This. And And this is part of a much larger model that was about 6 feet long. And the story goes, this was made by NRF Carpenters, and the story goes that Doris Duke would use this to move around the different pieces of the model to get a better sense of how the square would turn out to be. And so if you want to learn more about this project, including seeing more design drawings, you can visit our exhibition at Rough Point, which is called 1776-2026. The Newport Restoration Foundation reflects on the American Revolution, and we're always free for Newport County residents. So if you haven't had a chance to check it out, we welcome you to do that. Okay, so now I'd like to introduce the panel. Each of these panelists undertake vital work protecting and promoting our shared history and cultural heritage, and we're so thankful they could be part of the discussion this evening. I also wanted to say that we are going to miss Ron Honorado tonight, as he's unfortunately unable to join us. So we were saying earlier, maybe we can have a part 2 of this discussion sometime in the future. All right, I'm going to introduce everyone in alphabetical order. So first up is Rebecca Bertrand. Becca is the Executive Director of the Newport Historical Society, where she preserves and celebrates the rich history of Newport, Rhode Island. As the organization's chief executive, she oversees the stewardship of a collection of centuries-old historic landmarks, including the Wanton Lyman Hazard House, which is now open as a Center for Black History, the Great Friends Meeting House, and the Colony House. In this role, she leads the curation of engaging exhibitions for visitors of every age and interest. Under her leadership, NHS has developed nationally recognized, innovative public programs that bring Newport's people, places, and consequential moments to life for diverse audiences. She is also a strong advocate for historic preservation beyond Newport. She is the board chair of Preserve Rhode Island, where she contributes her expertise to advance the preservation of our state's rich cultural heritage. She sits on the Rhode Island 250 Commission and is treasurer of Discover Newport. Welcome, Becca.
Thank you.
Next is Trudy Cox. Trudy is the Chief Executive Officer and Executive Director of the Preservation Society of Newport County, which is a position she has held since December 1998. Under her stewardship, the Society has evolved into Rhode Island's largest cultural organization, overseeing 11 architecturally and historically significant properties, 7 of which are designated National Historic Landmarks. The Society's accreditation by the American Alliance of Museums underscores its national stature and institutional rigor. Her leadership has consistently advanced institutional growth, fostered public trust, and prompted critical discourse about how heritage stewardship can coexist with environmental innovation and contemporary development. Her contributions have been recognized by numerous accolades, including the 2023 Greatest Living Rhode Islanders recognition by Go Local Prof, a testament to her enduring influence on the civic and cultural fabric of the state of home. And last but certainly not least, Keith Stokes. Keith is currently serving as the Rhode Island Historian Laureate, and throughout his 4 decades of public service in Rhode Island, he's remained dedicated to building a community that welcomes everyone who calls the Ocean State home. He is presently Director of the State of Rhode Island Division of Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion. He has also been an advisor for Rhode Island with the National Trust for Historic Preservation and served on numerous local, regional, and national businesses and public boards, including the Preservation Society for Newport County, Tour Synagogue Foundation, Rhode Island Historical Preservation and Heritage Commission, Historical Review Board, the Rhode Island Black Heritage Society, Rhode Island Economic Development Corporation, Quonset Development Corporation, the Rhode Island Foundation, and the American Antiquarian Society. So, thank you all. All right, okay. All right, so as we noted, Queen Anne Square was a collaborative project between Trinity Church, the Newport Development Agency, and following Doris Duke's vision, the Newport Restoration Foundation. It transformed this neighborhood between 1971 and 1978. And planning at the time proposed that the square be, quote, a square recalling the best of the nation's colonial past for the inspiration of present and future generations. And I think we're going to talk a little bit about how it's lived up to that promise today. So starting with Keith, can you share with us your perspective on Queen Anne Square as someone who grew up in the city? For most of the people who live or visit the city today, it may be hard to imagine how different the streetscape looked and felt. So can you tell us more about that, please?
All right. Thank you, Gina, and it's great to be here. This is fascinating to me as someone who grew up in this church, but also a part of a generation that grew up in Newport before the Pell Bridge was completed. So I have a very learned, lived experience of seeing the evolution of Newport during the mid-20th century. You really can't talk about the evolution of Queen Anne Square or Newport today without recognizing the impacts of what we call the urban renewal era, which is the mid-20th century federal initiative that would provide massive amounts of federal dollars in statutory authority to reshape urban communities and urban landscapes. And here in Rhode Island, it had significant impacts on particularly our capital city, Providence, and our city that is our home, Newport. And there are almost 5 events around that era that all come together that have direct input into what is today Queen Anne Square and the larger historical landscape of Newport. The first, which actually predates urban renewal, is in 1913, when in that time, Frederick Law Olmsted Jr. was brought to the city of Newport by leadership, civic and business leadership, for the purposes of beginning to think of Newport in a modern way, pre-World War I, to accommodate automobiles, the advent of automobiles. And at that time, they put forth a plan which later would lead to the conversion of Bath Road into what is today Memorial Boulevard. And that larger plan included not only Bath Road becoming a boulevard, but also connecting it to what is today Valley Road, and eventually being a circular boulevard, a boulevard system that would bring cars in and out of Newport. And this is in 1913. It sat on the shelf a bit, but it was something that clearly resonated with business leaders and elected officials. And then we had to kind of get through a World War I and II. After World War II, we're now beginning to accommodate the returning vets, the greatest generation, and there's a significant interest in accommodating these young men and women as they're now building lives and families and homes. And you begin to see a series of federal policies and practices and funding, which we wrap around what we call urban renewal, which is effectively engaging cities and towns to identify blighted, underutilized neighborhoods, properties, and structures in providing federal impetus, tax credits, direct grants, support systems to remove that blight and reshape those communities. Now, that's a lot to say, and it's very broad base. But the authority of actual redevelopment was fully vested within state legislatures, who in turn, by enabling legislation, created local redevelopment authorities. So Newport, like most urban centers, would establish an urban redevelopment authority appointed by the city council with very broad and directed powers. Their broad powers were, you can determine which neighborhoods are blighted, and then which properties within neighborhoods are blighted. We will give you the authority of eminent domain. So if we have to take private property to begin to reshape, remove blight, or reshape the infrastructure for a prosperous Newport, you have that authority. And we're going to give you access to direct federal and state capital grants, and also lending and investment authority. So this is pretty powerful. It's a powerful tool, a tool that we haven't quite seen before in America. And it was aggressively implemented over a 40-year period, starting after World War II and spilling into the mid-late 1970s. In the case of Newport, what really began to drive that decision process in the mid-60s is the advent of needing to have a bridge. We needed to somehow supplement this ferry system, which we all loved. I could always remember my late dad. The worst thing in the world was to come back late from New York and miss that last ferry at 6 o'clock in Jamestown, and then you had to drive all the way around Route 1, right? Because there's no 95, which was another 2 hours to get back to town. But in any case, 1969 is the threshold area. That is when Newport Bridge is completed, and now Newport is officially connected to the mainland, more so than the Mount Hope Bridge and the Sakonnet Bridge. Between 1969 and 1972, the goal is to complete the vision plan of Memorial Boulevard. We need to connect Memorial Boulevard and the downtown to this bridge. And that would be the advent of America's Cup Boulevard. And again, it's a boulevard. It was never designed and built for people or for the scale of neighborhoods and homes. It was built for cars, to move cars in and out of the city as effectively and efficiently as it could be. But it's a car-driven process, not a people-driven process. And that's not to hear to say it's good, bad, or indifferent. That was the policy and practice at that time. In 1973, with the completion, the near completion of America's Cup, you saw the advent of the Atlantic Fleet leaving Newport. And by the end of 1973, I had just started high school. I started Rogers High School. There were so many students, we had double sessions. Freshmen and sophomores were in the morning, juniors and seniors in the afternoon. The next year, it almost disappeared. the population almost disappeared. We had an 18% unemployment rate on Aquinic Island in the early 70s after the loss of the Atlantic Fleet. It was devastating. So it was very important at that time for city leaders, business leaders, civic leaders, what will we do with this community? What can be done? Now, we already began the process of making a way for America's Cup and connecting it to Memorial Boulevard by removing the entire west side of Thames Street, running from Brick Market down to literally Thames Street and America's Cup and Memorial Boulevard and such. And outside the Siemens Church Institute and the Brick Marketplace, most buildings were taken down. A few were initially taken and restored and later replanted by David Ray, Bart Dunbar, who had the vision of Bowens and Bannister's Wharf. But what's important to understand is that at that time, Newport was facing a critical change, a significant transformative change. If we are not an industrial base, working base, military economy, what should we be? Tourism obviously stepped in. And to have a tourism economy, and again, this is not to say that's good or bad or indifferent, it's the decisions that were made 50 plus years ago. A tourism economy had to support a different infrastructure. It had to support an environment on the waterfront, which is not, before that, for the first 300 years, people who lived on the waterfront, the Point, Thames Street, worked on the waterfront. It wasn't a view shed. It wasn't a lifestyle choice. I lived here because I'm Greek, I'm Portuguese, I'm Cape Verdean, I'm black, and I work on the waterfront. Now, all of a sudden, the waterfront was being reclaimed for more of a tourism hospitality environment. And with that said, you begin to see literally the creation of America's Cup Boulevard, the connection to Memorial Boulevard, accommodating cars. The west side comes down. There's incentives for developers to create mixed-use development. And for the first time now, there's incentives for people to live on the waterfront. And you begin to see zoning and land use plans that begin to accommodate either transient guest facilities, hotels. I hate to say hotels because everyone gets very mad when they hear that, but hotels and other transient guest facilities, living environments where we began to see timeshares become later condominiums and such, things that weren't happening for the first 300 years, but were happening now because of the advent of the loss of the Atlantic Fleet and now the accommodation of a tourism economy. With that said, you begin to see now an important focus on how do we begin to market Newport for the upcoming bicentennial. That becomes incredibly important. It's not only the 1976 bicentennial, but it's the following year, it's the 1977 America's Cup. Remember, since the advent of the America's Cup in 1854, we won, and it was Newport-based. And until 1983, when the Aussies won, we're still wondering about that keel and how they won, but they won. But between the late 19th century into the early 20th century, America's Cup was ours. And in 1976, with the bicentennial, we had an opportunity to not only showcase Newport as a part of the anniversary of the Declaration of Independence and the founding of America, but we also had an opportunity to set the stage of a new waterfront that would accommodate visitors and people who could engage a major international event like America's Cup. And what set America's Cup off in 1977, I'll say unabashedly, I was there, I remember, it was the fact that it's the courageous that wins. And who's the owner? Ted Turner. And who's his girlfriend at that time? Jane Fonda. For the first time, it's on the front page of literally every newspaper in the nation, Sports Illustrated. Everyone wanted to be, even if they didn't sail, know anything about sails or cups or such, I just felt like I got to be in Newport. And in 1976, that set the stage for everyone wanting to be not just in Newport, in a hospitality tourism environment, but we want to be on the waterfront. We want to be a part of a waterfront environment. And it just opened the door for massive investment, massive transformative changes in uses, activities, and I'm not here to say that's good, bad, or indifferent. That's the history. That's what occurred at that time. But what was most important for Newporters, and particularly this parish and the leaders in the community, was Trinity Church, our sacred place, one of the most historic buildings in this city and this nation. Our front porch doesn't look so great. At that time, there was no Queen Anne Square. It was Frank Street. It was a small street, and it was literally clustered with old, late 19th century warehouse buildings, not historic colonial buildings, but larger 19th century ancillary warehouse buildings. In the front, you had the Walsh Brothers furniture store. You had the Egan family, Jack Egan with the laundromat and the smokestack. As a kid, it looked great. It was fun. It was interesting. But I can tell you, when I was taking confirmation classes in the early 70s, I was not allowed after Wednesday evening to hang downtown. I had to wait right here for my parents to pick me up because I couldn't just kind of walk around downtown in 1972 or 1973 safely. So it's important to recognize that with everything going on, with the bicentennial coming forward, it was so important in the recognition of Trinity Church, the recognition of our new vibrant community, that we create a town center. We create an environment that can welcome people, that can connect the waterfront to the historic hill. In fact, I would suggest one of the challenges of America's Cup, it was built for cars. It's a boulevard. It's not a road. It's not a scenic road. It's a boulevard. One of the challenges of America's Cup is it's certainly efficient for cars, but it's almost impossible to connect people from the east-west patches, moving from the hill, the neighborhoods to the waterfront. It's a challenge. What Queen Anne Square was conceived to do, and what I think it's done for 50 years quite well, is it's created a safe space. It's created a very important patch of green that connects people and the scale of people to the hill, to the neighborhoods, to our church, to the waterfront, to the community. And that was the vision at that time. Let me tell you, if Queen Anne Square was not created as what we have today, and what we sometimes take for granted today, the original plans were a parking facility in some mixed uses of commercial and residential, but that was very much at a lower end. It was a parking lot. It was to accommodate the cars coming off of a Pell Bridge in America's Cup Boulevard. So if it wasn't for the vision of the civic leaders in this community, Mrs. Duke and the Restoration Foundation, it's a gift. They stepped forward and said, no more cars. Let's do something for the people. Let's give a gift for the people, a park, a public space, a safe space in a very bustling downtown community. So that's the short history. There's so much more to it, and I would love to talk about some of the disruptions of the neighborhoods, because one of the challenges of transforming from a working class, urban, Atlantic Fleet seaport community and all the ancillary services that go with that to a tourism community is now the gentrification we're seeing. Newport has a very small and dwindling working class population. It's next to impossible if you are a young working class person, middle income person, to live in Newport, to own a home in Newport. And that's a challenge for us, and we see that in our employment and our workforce. And it's one of the challenges that are a part of our success, the part of the success of transformation, the part of success of being a well-branded hospitality tourism community. But I just want to end with, and again, what Queen Anne Square means to me, and I go all the time, it's a safe space. It's a place where I can stop, I can look at the waterfront, I'm not jousting cars or people or activity, I can look up the hill. It gives me an orientation, which you don't really have as much in a community as special as Newport. And again, that's hats off to Mrs. Duke and the Restoration Foundation and the men and women that led that effort 50 years before us.
Well, I think first, it's more than a role. It's a responsibility. And I think that all of us sitting up here on this panel have such an important and a wonderful opportunity, and all of our boards and our volunteers and our incredible employees work hard every single day to make sure that history isn't forgotten. And I think the wonderful opportunities that we have and that Keith was just talking about, it's about placemaking. And I think that that's what we do every single day. That's why I go to work every single day. And when I wasn't working at the Historical Society, I had an incredible opportunity before that to lead Newport Film, which was a wonderful time in my life. And I think my parents were rolling their eyes, being like, why are you running a documentary film organization? We sent you to school to study historic preservation. What happened here? But to me, that was still preservation, because it was making sure that public spaces and private spaces with these incredible historic structures on them were being used by the public. And I think that's something that we see every day, and that's why we live here. That's why we love this community, because we're able to see these incredible spaces used by people. And I think it's also something that's passive. You know, it's in the back of your mind. It's why we cherish the place that we live, and why we choose to raise our children here, why you choose to worship, if you're a member of this congregation, why you choose to worship here, because you have this history all around you every day. And I think that, connecting history to preservation is also a really important thing. It's why genealogy is such a popular hobby, and why so many people choose to come in to our organization to do research every day. Maybe they're writing their dissertation, or maybe they're someone who's just here to learn about their own family history. And I think that both are just as important. Maybe you're learning about the history of your own historic house, and that's as important to me as someone who's walking in for the first time, who's like a high school student who's like, I have no idea what's happening in this building, or is this Toro Synagogue, which is also something that happens every single day because they don't understand the difference between our resource center on Toro Street and Toro Synagogue. And for me, it's also finding different ways to find that hook, because maybe it is contemporary art that is something that says, oh, I understand what history is now. That's why in the Center for Black History, we have all kinds of contemporary art, because that might be the way in. That might be the way that a high school student for the first time finds history. So for me, it's more than just a role, and it's why we love the place that we live.
All right, I'm going to turn it over to Trudy now. So you also lead an organization, and your organization has had more than 70 years of preservation experience in Newport County and during some really pivotal moments in the history of historic preservation in the city. So could you share some more about your perspective on historic preservation and the impacts it's had on the city, and also think about why is historic preservation so important to the success of our community? I guess I'm thinking also along the lines of the impact on the economy, which is something we sort of touched on. And I think you need this.
I think you need that.
All right, I'll talk into this. First of all, that was a phenomenal intro, Keith. I learned so much from you, so thank you very much. And I do just want to take a moment before answering your question, Gina, to reflect on some of the things that Keith just said, because I summered in Jamestown, and he thinks it was bad to miss the ferry. If you're a Jamestowner and you're 15 years old and you have to call your father to tell him that you have missed the ferry along with your 25 other friends, believe me, there's a lot of silence in that car driving up through Bristol to Providence and back down to the east side of Narragansett Bay, and you never missed the ferry again. I also want to reflect on the fact that in a lot of ways, the departure of the Navy was a horrendous thing for not just Newport, but all of Rhode Island. I mean, tens of thousands of people lost their jobs, but it did give the Preservation Society an unbelievably unique opportunity, and that was to buy from the Vanderbilt family the breakers for $366,000, building, land, and contents, and that was the appraised legitimate value. I mean, think about that. So I know a lot of people lost their jobs, but it was good for us. And then third, it has been 81 years, and if you look back on the history of the Preservation Society, I think that Catherine Warren, along with Doris Duke, along with, interestingly, primarily women, did some unbelievable things with great vision. And to think about Catherine Warren back in 1945 saying, as the topic of the destruction of Hunter House was about to occur, stating that, wait a minute, the assets of Hunter House do not belong in New York at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. They belong in Newport, Rhode Island. They are our asset. Really set the stage very early on for an ethic of preservation. And she joined forces with Countess Sashani, and she joined forces with Doris Duke and others. And you know, if you ever want inspiration for historic preservation, go back and look at the minutes, at least of the Preservation Society's early meetings. I mean, these people had tremendous, tremendous views of what our future could look like. And in those days, she was saying that the World War II had ended. What would be the future of Newport? Would we go in the direction of continuing to manufacture torpedoes during World War II, maybe something else? Or would we take a new direction? And that would be to capitalize on an asset that Newport has, which is hundreds of historic, beautiful colonial houses. Maybe they were run down. and thank goodness for Doris Duke. But this is an asset that was very unique to the Northeast, really very unique to America. And guess what? We still have it. So we are very fortunate. From a historic preservation perspective, I look at historic preservation, and this is what I do every day of the week, with a lot of mixed emotions, I guess. I'm very proud of the work that the Preservation Society has done to protect 11 very important buildings, including Hunter House, which was built in the 1740s. And I know from all the studies that have been done, one led by Preserve Rhode Island under the leadership of Teresa, Val Talmadge, you, Becca, that every economic study shows, and these are national studies, show that historic preservation is an economic driver for a community. So I think a lot of skeptics would say, oh, historic preservation, that's a nice thing that you do, but actually it's far more than that. And the Preservation Society had an economic study done about it 2 years ago, and it showed that the economic value of just our 11 buildings is about $250 million to the state of Rhode Island. It's not we're giving $250 million to the state. We're generating that kind of economic activity. So you add in all of the other things, whether it's the Restoration Foundation or the Historical Society or Preserve Rhode Island or the Rhode Island Historical Society, and all of the restoration work that homeowners are doing, and it really becomes, young people move to historic areas because they want to live in something that is authentic. Why do we go to Europe? We go to Europe because we want to see something that is old and weathered and unique. There is a real, I think, spiritual, deep value to the work that we do that is very hard to articulate, but still is the thing that drives me. I wish I could express it well, but I can't. But bottom line for me, historic preservation is an important economic driver, a very important spiritual driver, a beauty driver, a lot of values that when you see bad development, i.e. along 138 or 114, sorry, but to me that's ugly, you come back to the center of Newport and say, whew, wow, thank goodness for those people back in the 40s when the sense of historic preservation was just emerging, but they knew something. They knew that there was something here and something right, and they held to their beliefs, and all of us have followed in their footsteps. So,
yeah, thank you. So I think the thread I heard among all your answers was really getting back to that idea of placemaking, like Becca was saying, that that's really the center of what we're doing here and why Newport is so special. All right, so back to Keith. You have dedicated much of your life's work to telling more nuanced, inclusive histories. So in your opinion, what role does historic preservation play in that work? And what opportunities does historic preservation present for uncovering and sharing a more complete story through the work of historic preservation?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, we're talking about the country's 250th this year, and in a decade or so, we'll be approaching our 400th history here in Newport. So you're talking about 4 centuries of stuff, of events, people living, working, worshiping, dying. That's a lot. And very few communities in America, have that type of legacy in history. So for me, it's important to recognize the history as it evolved, as factually it can be, but also recognize the fact of the dynamics that many, many people occupied these historic spaces, and particularly in a place like Newport over 4 centuries. And sometimes in historic preservation, we tend to default to what we believe is the easiest story or the most compelling story. And for those of us that are determining what the easiest compelling story is, we might have a limited perspective. So for me, it's a challenge where in a case of Newport, when we're talking about historic structures, it's not just simply the most famous person that lived, worked, or worshiped there. It's about everyone and anyone over centuries, and then how that structure evolved and adapted and still stands to this very day. That's the story that I see. So when I talk about Queen Anne Square and the historic hill, and I was just telling Vicki this, is during the urban renewal era, many of the families that were displaced in Historic Hill, the Point, West Broadway, were largely, almost all working families. Many ethnic immigrants, Greek, Portuguese, Italians, Polish, all coming to work on the waterfront in Newport, and then a significant number of historic African heritage families. In fact, African heritage families are here at the very beginning and are very much grounded and rooted in homes and structures and places of worship, particularly here in the historic hill, and all that gets wiped away. So it's so very important today, the work that we do, that we recognize that everything that we today cherish, every structure, every building, every landscape and site that we look and say, wow, that's really great, and boy, I'm so proud of that, we should also remember we're standing on the shoulders of largely working class men, women, and families, many ethnic, many racial minorities, religious minorities, who came here and built and sustained those properties. They're the ones that give us today the audacity to recognize Newport for what it is. So for me, it's so important to tell all the stories and to see it not in isolated pockets. It's not an indigenous story, an African heritage story, a Jewish story, a Christian story. It's the story of Newport and how all these different people somehow figured out that they could come together and live, work, and worship here, unlike anywhere else within the country. And the testament is the historic properties that we have. So the challenge that I see today is that the younger population, they may not read as I may have done in my generation, so it's social media. And I think Becca is absolutely right. I think we need to provide educational programs, displays, exhibits in a way that engages a whole new younger market, which may not be coming into our historic property and coming into our historic neighborhood. It might reach them through social media, it might reach them through video, TikTok, Instagram. There's a whole new way. But once we reach them, the goal is to get them to physically come here, to experience it, and to have an informed and, most importantly, an enjoyable visit. The late Noreen Drexel said something to me years ago, which was prophetic. And we were talking about the large numbers of visitors coming to Newport and how challenging that gets with the cars and the people and the crowds and the waiting. And we were talking about historic tourism and the historic visitor. And what does that look like? How do we brand an historic visitor? And I'll paraphrase, but Noreen's was, I want people with very tiny feet and really fat pocketbooks. And that's true. And what she was saying is that we want people to come, but not encroach on our neighborhoods and communities, respect our historic sites, our fragile nature of the community, but we want them spending a lot of money here, leaving money here, so we can use that money to continue to sustain our operations in our community. So Noreen was right. So I think the challenge today is, how do we continue to preserve properties, but also tell stories that are relevant and connect to that next group of visitors, that next group of investors, supporters, so that we can continue to do what we do well in Newport, is tell this incredible story of America.
Thanks, Keith. Okay, so Becca, turning over to you. This year, as you know, is the 250th anniversary of the founding of the United States. Thank you. And it seems like this has been a really important opportunity to amplify the message of not just your organization, but the larger history of our nation. So can you talk a little bit more about what this moment has meant for the work you all are doing now, but also the significance of that?
Sure, yeah. This has been an absolutely thrilling and exciting year for the Historical Society, and I think for Newport as a community. One of the most exciting things that we were able to do as a group of organizations was to form a committee of kind of cross-organization, not just historic organizations, but also houses of worship, the Edward King House, all people who were just interested in history and how we could commemorate the 250th and talk about what we could do as a community, whether it was painting fire hydrants, a forthcoming project that is led by the Edward King House in the figures of historic Newporters, to running community-wide projects like the French in Newport program, which is tomorrow, and all across the community, with open houses from Trinity Church to Vernon House to Hunter House to the Colony House to the 6,000 French flags, which were lovingly placed across at the Rochambeau statue today. So if I look a little sunburnt, it's because I am. And if I leave a little early, it's because the French ambassador to the United States is arriving momentarily to Newport. And it's a really, really exciting year. And it's been an exciting year that started actually last year as we ran an event in the Colony House with Paul Revere coming to be part of the program. So I have to say, it's not just about historic reenactors, which is, one way in that some people find to be a really interesting way to see history. We've had new exciting exhibitions and walking tours. And then really, traditional things like new publications and a joint journal with Rhode Island Historical Society, a very academic kind of traditional way to experience history. So from new research to collaborative cross-organization work, I think that there's been really fascinating ways that we're not just looking to the past, but we're also looking to the future. The other really wonderful thing that we've been able to do is connect with a lot of hereditary societies, the Daughters of the American Revolution, my girl Kim, Bestie, who've been really wonderful to help form new organizations and new ways that they're looking at their own ancestors and connecting with their own roots, which I think is really wonderful because they're passing that on to their children and their children's children. And I think that that's been a really exciting way that people are finding their own connections. So if you're around tomorrow, please join us at French in Newport. It's all day long from 10 to 4. Pretty much any site that has any connection to the French are open. And if you're here at Trinity Church at noon, meet some descendants and help with the wreath laying ceremony and meet some French because the French ambassador will be here at noon. And also 27 members of a French military band who are also here. They're lovely. So we look forward to you joining with us on that last day of Independence Week.
Thanks, Becca. And I wanted to pick up on your point about the future, that historic preservation is for the future. So Trudy, can you tell us a little bit more about how you've seen the field evolve over the past decades, and then also maybe where you see us going in the future, and maybe some examples from creative visitor experience, exhibits, etc. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, I mentioned before that I have mixed feelings about historic preservation currently and in the future, and I think and I've been in the either environmental or historic preservation field all of my life. And in fact, my first job was to be hired by a woman, Kit Wright, a Jamestowner, who had this vision for the Quaker Meeting House, and she was a descendant of the Bethlehem Steel fortune, and she invested a lot of money into restoring that building. And I had the phenomenal opportunity to work on not only the restoration of that building, but create the programming for it. This was back in the 70s. Yeah. And trying to get people to come to a Quaker Meeting House to visit was not easy, but I think we did pretty well. And I love that building. And just, I look back on who were the mentors in my life, and certainly the fact that she had this view of this remarkable building, 1699, Roger Williams and George Fox having their debate on it, I don't know, thrilling. But my worries about the field that we are in, and now I'm going to sound like a Debbie Downer, and I'm sorry to do it, but I studied this data all day long. This is what drives me, and did with my colleague at the Preservation Society, Jim Burris, when he was the finance director, that so many studies tell us that cultural activities across this country are on the decline. And we are fortunate to be able to see the attendance data for more than 100 museums in New England. And guess what? On the decline. And it's not just historic buildings, it's the ballet, it's the orchestra. Well, Broadway is coming back. People don't go to movies anymore if you consider that a cultural, I consider that a cultural activity on the decline. And so what keeps me awake at night is how do we guarantee that we're around 100 years? But the data that is even more troubling to me is the data that shows that I think it's about 65%. There are 30,000 museums in America. 18,000 of them are historic house museums. Of those 18,000, about 65% operate on budgets of less than $50,000 a year. I mean, that is nothing if you have to repair a roof or fix the gutters or the windows are leaking. That is nothing. But this is the even more troubling statistic, and that is of these 18,000 historic house museums, and that's what we operate, 80% are operated with no staff at all. They're operated with volunteers, wonderful volunteers, hardworking volunteers, men and women who pour their hearts and soul into keeping history alive, and most of them are old. Not young people, old. So what happens when, I mean, I don't see anybody much under 40 in this audience. Well, maybe you are, Mark. Are you under 40, Mark Fry? Okay. What happens when we begin to disappear from this world? I don't know. Well, Katie, Ryan, you're probably under 40. So it's all yours, Katie. Okay. I mean, I worry about this because it means that something will happen to the building, something will happen to all the objects in that building, something is going to happen probably on eBay, something is going to happen to all the stories. Keith is right, we want inclusive stories, we want to cover the whole gamut of our real history. Who tells those stories in the future? To me, this is a real issue. This is what I worry about. This is truly what I worry about at 3 o'clock in the morning. So we have tried to be as innovative and new as we possibly can be. And one of the things that, and we've done, you know this, we've done concerts of young folk and jazz musicians in our buildings, and it's aired on Facebook and on Instagram, and has really had a wonderful reaction from younger people. Maybe that makes them say, hey, let's do this on Saturday or something. That's great. And we're opening up a brand new tour at the Elms in October, if all goes well. That is an immersive tour of the Elms, where new visitors will come to the Elms, 25 activations throughout the house. It might be an activation of sound, it might be an activation of sight, it might be smell, a completely different way of teaching history, not the traditional. And on your left is the Townsend and Goddard table, and it was built by, it's not that at all. It's trying to entice young people, with lots and lots of opportunities to use your phone to learn more. And why are we doing that? Because we see we give close to 1 million tours a year at our houses. And guess what? Many of the younger people are looking at their phones. How many of you have been to a Thanksgiving or Christmas dinner? And everybody is, wait, I can get an answer to that, just a minute. I mean, this is a different world. We depend on our iPhones. So whether we like it or not, we got to start using technology in a way that is new and different. And it's troubling because none of us knows where this is going to go. But we're very excited about the immersive tour of the Elms, and I think that if it is successful, and I know it's going to be, it is geared to younger people, and that hopefully will drive younger people to other houses and drive younger people to learn more about history and watch on Netflix history shows instead of the Housewives of Rhode Island. And to me, that is a good thing.
Thank you. So yeah, it feels like we've come a bit full circle. We started with the past, and now we're thinking about the future. Chair. I just wanted to give you both an opportunity if there's any thoughts you wanted to share before we turn it over to the audience for a Q&A. I'm sure we have more questions.
Yeah, I just want to add, because I think Becca and Trudy did a great job. If someone was to ask me, what's the challenges of Newport today and tomorrow? What is what we have to watch very carefully and be prepared for, particularly in the context of historic preservation, interpretation, I would strongly suggest it's managing growth. Growth is going to happen. Like it or not, good or bad design, market changes, it's going to happen. We have to have policies and practices in place to manage growth that keeps it within the scale, in the interests of the men, women, and families that live here year-round. So managing growth is going to be a significant challenge before us because, again, we are a built city. In fact, I've always said over my career, we are the adaptive reuse capital of America, meaning we've had buildings change and change and change and evolve, but they're still the same building in most cases and such. So with that said, we don't have land available to expand our tax base or to create large-scale affordable housing or whatever we want to do, parks. We don't have those options. We are a built community. So whatever we do has to be done thoughtfully, strategically, and well-planned because we're largely going to be reusing existing properties, just like Queen Anne Square. I mean, Queen Anne Square could have gone a very different way 50 years ago. But fortunately, because of Mrs. Duke, because of the city leadership and the civic leadership, most importantly, I believe it went the way that we all enjoy today. So managing growth is going to be absolutely essential in going forward with that. And what does that mean? Well, it means thinking very strategically and not about individual projects. It's not about this hotel going here or this use going here. It's about what do we want this section of Newport to look like in the next 5, 10, 15 years? And what do we need to put in place to preserve that vision? So it's more of a systems approach. But I will tell you, managing growth is going to be absolutely essential. It's not thinking outside the box, it's thinking inside the box. We already know what we like, we know what works, we know what we want to preserve and what we value. How do we ensure that anything else that comes behind it augments that and supports that and not competes with that? That's a unique challenge. Most communities in America don't have that challenge. We've worked with Savannah, Charleston. Trudy and I have gone to Charleston. We kid the mayor down there, Mayor Riley, who's great. I mean, we call him the Newport of the South. He calls Newport the Charleston of the North. But the reality is that they're wrestling with similar issues that we're wrestling with, is managing a very vibrant tourism system, managing gentrification, but also trying to create a viable community. And in their case, it's not wholesale change. It's just managing these incremental changes with projects going on across the community. So I just strongly urge all of us, let's play a role in understanding growth management. Let's play a role of encouraging our civic leaders, our critical boards and organizations to do the job of preserving Newport for the future. But the starting point is always historic preservation, because that's the one thing we have no one else has. We have one of the largest concentrations of existing pre-Revolutionary War properties in America. We don't even have to talk about Gilded Age because we dominate that. So the things that we have here as assets, people wish they would have. So from our standpoint, how do we manage it? And what are the types of policies and plans and uses we need to put in place over the next 5, 10, 20 years to maintain this base? And it's a unique challenge, but it's one I think we're up to do.
Yeah, I think that is so well said. And managing growth, favorite topic, is not just hard, but it really requires a lot of courage and it requires a lot of toughness. And I think all of us have dealt with the zoning board and the planning board and the HDC and wonder how and why they didn't hold firmer longer, and why are certain things happening along the waterfront or landscapes are changing dramatically, and why didn't anybody say anything about it? And I think oftentimes it's just not having courage to stand up and fight back. And we struggle with this at the Preservation Society. To what extent is a GrowSmart or a NRF or a historic Newport Historical Society how much of an obligation do we have to be activists? Or is our job just to preserve? And I'm sort of coming to the conclusion that organizations like ours have to be far more outspoken than we have. But we run a risk, and that is that if you don't agree, I depend upon many people in this room, thank you very much for your membership, but if we come out with a position that you don't like, we're finished. So we are walking, I think, a very, very fine line. Future, I think that, again, so many studies have shown, and this is not just in preservation, but on environmental issues, that those parents and grandparents, this sounds so simple, but we should remember it. Kids who grow up with parents or grandparents who took them out for walks in the woods, or took them to museums, or forced them to go whether they want to or not, and Mark knows this story, we have seen people in the parking lot, parents fighting with their children about whether they are going to go and visit the house or not. And sometimes the parent gives in and says, okay, play on your iPad. And sometimes the parent says, nope, you're coming in. And oftentimes when you talk to the child at the end of the tour, it wasn't so bad.
No.
So I think if we as adults don't really force our children, our nieces, our nephews, our grandchildren. Katie, I'm talking to you because you have your young, 3-month-old baby with you. If you don't make it happen, you don't grow up with that sensibility, that inner something that says, I got to go back. And anyway, that's kind of where I come from, without being emotional.
Can I add one more? I'm going to add one more thing. I want to add one more thing that's important. Historic preservation is more than structures, it's landscapes, and that's what Queen Anne Square represents.
Yes.
So it's important that we recognize going forward, there are so many historic landscapes and uses within those landscapes that need to be preserved. To give you a quick final example, what is today Newport Shipyard was very much in the late 80s and early 90s under the threat of ownership taken from receivership to be turned into hotels and a docominium, which would have changed the landscape of Washington Street into the Point neighborhood. And the city council, which I was on at that time, had the gumption, led by the late Bill Nagel, this was his concept, to create a new overlay zone, which was a waterfront district overlay zone that stopped that project in the tracks. They sued us, we won, but it opened the door and set the stage for what is today Newport Shipyard. And today, it's the last working shipyard in the city. If we went back to 1976 and the Bicentennial and Queen Anne Square, we had 4 working shipyards in this city along Thames Street. So it's important to recognize historic preservation is not only the historic structure that's in front of us, it's certain industries, it's landscapes, it's the entire fabric of the community. I would have to say that one of the best decisions I was involved in was preserving Newport Shipyard. And Charlie Daner and his son came in, they took it over, and we get complaints. Sometimes people in the neighborhoods will say, a little loud, the fiberglass, and I'm sitting here saying, but it's a shipyard. And thank God we have it. But the point is that we have an opportunity to do bold, innovative moves like that so we can continue to preserve our historic landscapes, our historic community, and our peace in mind as year-round residents of this community.
So I think we have time for a few questions before we wrap up. If anybody has a question, yes.
I'd like to just make a comment. That the city right now is going through a review 10-year comprehensive plan, and there are a number of focus groups that have been meeting to decide what's going to go into the comprehensive plan. And my feeling is that the city of Newport exists because of its harbor. Not because of the waterfront, but because of the harbor. And if the harbor is maintained as a healthy and vibrant unit, then the rest of the city will fall in after it. So keeping the harbor healthy will help make the city healthy. You guys think that I'm on the right track with that?
Well, I certainly do, based on my days as a former director of Save the Bay. I can't believe I'm this old, but do you know that, well, I can't believe that I was actually here in 76 when Queen Elizabeth, my father, thank goodness that my father liked history, dragged us to see Queen Elizabeth, and I was probably in my 20s then, but wow, that to me is still a memory that I have that's a very strong one. Yeah, I can remember that the University of Rhode Island came out with a study, now I'm going to sound like an environmental activist, which at heart I really am, came out with a study that said that this was a real economic study. The best economic use of Narragansett Bay was to use it as a sewer. That was a study that came out in the 70s. So that's when I began to work for a group called Save the Bay. And our big break in terms of getting people to pay attention to the bay, two things. I started a thing called the swim across the bay. And our first year, and believe it or not, it started at, sorry, I'm going from preservation, but it's kind of, I think of environmental protection and historic preservation very much in the same mind. But the first swim was from in front of the old Bay View Hotel in Jamestown. And we ended at the ramp at Hunter House. I mean, was I crazy? What was I thinking? But it worked. And now, this year, the 50th anniversary of the swim will be held, and I'm going to be there. But that first swim, several days before the start, we got a call from the Department of Health. I'm looking at Bill Salmon, and were you here then? We got a call from the Department of Health that said, oh, the water along the shoreline is not swimmable, so we're concerned about this. Now, like, wow, this is great. This is fantastic. Oh, boy. So we made everybody row out. I think it was about 200 yards, and then they could jump from their rowboat into the bay and swim. Now, as somebody who's looking for a headline, I mean, that was a national headline. That was so fantastic. So to me, the harbor is the centerpiece of Newport. And yes, I love our houses, but this city grew from a harbor. This had its history based on the fact of one of the oldest, most important colonial seaports in America. This is all of Narragansett Bay. 5 miles from anybody, most people who live in Rhode Island, 70% of the population within 5 miles of an ocean. I mean, this is incredible. So I don't disagree with you at all, Ann. I think you're absolutely right. He probably has ways on how to make it better. But this is a harbor that is very different than it was 50 years ago.
Yeah.
I mean, I remember seeing sailors carry their masts along, they were America's Cup sailors, along Thames Street, getting ready to put their boats in the water. And now most of our harbor there aren't working shipyards, and there aren't fishing boats, and and that, I have to say, that makes me very sad, and we're not going to get that back. But yes, the harbor to me is very important.
No.
When you brought that up, Trudy, we still have beaches that are constantly closed, that are eroding waves. And we've been through 3 or 4 iterations just in the 8 years I've lived here of trying to figure out what to do about this. Paying consultants, still nothing happens. We have water quality that's sometimes not so good.
Mm-hmm.
So while I'm the biggest fan of buildings, I really wonder, if we err too much on the side of buildings versus environment, we're going to have problems.
Yeah.
Hello, my name is Fred Jody. I'll start by saying I'm one of the 2 organists here at Trinity. Queen Anne Square in some ways feels like it's Trinity's front yard. We throw strawberry
It is.
festivals, pumpkin patches, but who actually has authority for programming events in the space, both on this quadrant next to the church and then down? And if someone wanted to put on events, how would that happen? I always think it should be more somehow used for public events. That's perhaps a radical opinion.
That's a great question. If that's okay.
Yeah, you should.
So it's actually, right now there is a Queen Anne Square Trust. So there is support behind that and also a board as well. And it is a collaboration with the city. So everything would go through the city. So there's permits involved, things like that. But yeah, it's a really interesting question because the space was designed to be communal green space and a way to bring the community together, and it serves a really important function. And I think that there is an eagerness and desire to activate the space more. Yeah.
Have to get you and an organ out there.
Why not?
Now, I do want to respond to the very important statement with regards to built out of Newport and how it's impacting our water and certainly our quality of life. Again, one of the challenges of Newport is our population today is just around 24,000. So it's very tiny, and it's much less than we've seen in a century, quite candidly. With that said, there's been intensive strategic development, multi-use development along the waterfront, within the Point neighborhood, and within parts of the Hill. And with that said, our greatest challenge right now is stormwater. Because when you have major rain events, the stormwater has to go somewhere. Back in the early 90s, the city, when the federal government provided lots of funds, we built a combined sewer overflow tank right in the corner of Washington Square and Bridge Street, and it's underground there. But it's now at full capacity, and the city is struggling with the fact that we need a second capacity for stormwater flow, and we need something in the southern part of the city, preferably in the Wellington Avenue with the growth that's going on there. So the challenge is that it's a part of our success. I mean, what is today the Gateway Center in the Marriott, when that was completed in 1988, I ran for the council as a young kid because I thought it was a terrible design, and I'm very worried about what this is going to do to the city. And one of the things that that development did do was it removed a place where stormwater could go. That area, Cardines Field, is affectionately called the Basin, and across the street, which was J.T. O'Connell's and their shipyard, the railroads and such. But before that, there was a moat there, and it was a place where groundwater could go. Now with that being built out and filled, when you have a significant rain event and you happen to live in the Point or Bridge Street, it's all going and flowing into your communities and such. So again, it's a product of not really thinking through the consequences of having large condominiums and hotels in a very constricted waterfront area, and everyone in July is flushing their toilet at the same time or taking that half-hour shower at the same time. And all that water's got to go somewhere, and unfortunately, it's starting to back up into our community. So I would strongly suggest that it's going to be critically important for us that we begin to try to take a leadership role in managing our stormwater flow, our environment systems. The worst scenario is if it's not backing into your neighborhoods and homes, it's backing into the bay. And thus you're seeing the consistent beach closures and some of the lower bay closures from the fact that we're having now fecal chloride and other substances coming into the bay. So these are just challenges of success, and it's not sexy, and it doesn't get you on the front page of a newspaper. I'm going to build an attractive storm flow combined sewer overflow system, but it's something that's absolutely necessary, because without it, we're going to continue to see the degradation of our living environments and the degradations of our waterways, our harbors, and our beaches. It's so critically important.
I would just wanted to say too, because our organization is, I think, we are a national leader in historic preservation and thinking about climate change resiliency, which is really related to what you just said. So we're really excited to bring Keeping History Above Water back to Newport this year. So I'm just going to do a little plug there in October 21st through 23rd, and lots of programming and tours and awareness being brought to the issue that you're talking about, because it is related to historic preservation as well.
One more question.
Well, it's changing to some degree the look of the point, because homeowners are really forced to elevate their houses, or their basements and first floors are going to get flooded, so.
Yeah, we just did a walking tour with the Preservation Society today, where we walked down Bridge Street. We took a look at how neighborhood is adapting, and the work we're doing along with our neighbors, and then ended at Hunter House, because that's, yeah, it can be a real challenge.
So I hate to change the subject a little bit, because I think this is very important to the future of Newport and the houses and everything that we're talking about preservation. But when I was a kid, I watched the creation of Queen Anne Square and all of the different vignettes that go across that property. Can someone talk about each of them, or some of them that are important, to just describe what each of those vignettes, is what I call them, that are created, have been created there?
Do you mean the Maya Lin installation? Is that what we're talking about?
The installation.
The installation.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think after I know we're cutting into our reception here, I'm happy to take a walk and look more closely at those as well. So, spearheaded by our organization starting in 2011. It was a several-year project. We worked with Maya Lin to design the meeting rooms. So the idea behind that project was to show sort of the layers of history that had come before, because as we talked about today, the square was created in 1976. It had been many things over the years, and there had been just different layers of buildings that had once been there. So that's what those different rooms are showcasing, the foundations of different houses that had been there. And there was a lot of historical research that went behind to tell the story over the centuries, really, of different moments in time. And we also worked with stonemasons from the John Stevens shop, the Bensons. So I think it's a really interesting combination of thinking about this long tradition of Newport craft and history, and that's what it's designed to showcase. So that's a very short answer, but yeah. Yeah. So I think we're going to officially wrap up. I wanted to, can we give another round of applause, please, for the panelists? Thank you so much. I also want to extend a big thank you to the Trinity Church team, to Megan and Jeff and everyone for being such a great partner and for hosting us and for this collaborative program. I think this was really great. And again, we're going to invite you to reception now. This is going to be the Alan Bernstein Trio. We are honoring Doris Duke tonight, and she was not only a supporter of the performing arts and jazz music, she was a musician herself, so we thought that was really appropriate to enjoy some jazz music tonight. And that was thanks to Pudding Stone Music for bringing us the quartet. And again, I'll also be available if anybody wants to take a walk around the square. Happy to do that as well. So thank you all for being here. Really appreciate it. Thank you.